Cybersecurity professionals are in an arms race with cyber criminals who are increasingly well organised and well funded.
And here to tell us about the evolving threat of cybercrime, we're joined by Jane Frankland, who's been named as one of the top 20 global influencers in cybersecurity by IFSEC. And she's also the author of this book, In Security. This year at Sibos, she's one of the keynote speakers at Innotribe. So Jane, welcome to Sibos TV.
You.
And look, the world of cybercrime, it is moving at an incredible pace. So if you had to chart our progress, where are we today, so to speak?
The threat landscape is really, really interesting. It's highly complex, and right now I would say we're actually being owned by it. So we're seeing more threats evolve, the sophistication is increasing. Right now, the level of cybercrime is worth about 450 billion, so that's 0.8% of global GDP. So attacks are increasing, sophistication is increasing, but having said that, the sophistication required is not necessarily huge for the amount of attacks. So 70% of the attacks are not sophisticated.
But how is the actual threat evolving? And more to the point, how is it going to look in the future?
Well, that really depends on the actions that we take now. So this is something that I'm actually going to be talking about at Innotribe at Sibos. So right now, if we don't make certain shifts, and these are really to do with people, to do with getting more women into the industry and also focusing on leadership, we are going to be in a terrible situation. So we have attacks coming through from cyber criminals, from hacktivists, and also from state-sponsored attackers and spies.
Jane, why are cyber criminals able to innovate so quickly?
They just don't have the restrictions that we do. So we are restricted in terms of our employers, in terms of the way that we operate, and also in terms of regulations. So for attackers and cyber criminals is so much more open. So the business of cybercrime is huge. So they follow the money trail, and also it's easier for them. So they give what I talk about, giving to gain. So they're much more open, they're much more collaborative, and they're much more run like high-performing businesses. They have support contracts, they have marketplaces, and they are really strategic in how they go to market and who they target.
Right, so that puts a lot of pressure, of course, on those who are trying to combat these individuals. But let's put the spotlight on the banking industry, because you've got cybersecurity professionals there. So just how well are they able to protect their sector from these criminals, given that level of sophistication?
They're much more able than most. They have more resource. And what we tend to find and see in the industry is that most people in charge of it, so chief information security officers, don't have the resources. In finance, largely they do. So they have bigger teams and bigger budgets. So they're much more able. But you've got to remember that the advantage that the cyber criminals have over us is that they only need to find one way in. We have to mitigate risk. So our job isn't necessarily to secure all avenues, it's to mitigate the risk in line with the business's appetite for it. So therefore, we've always got to be prepared for when an attack happens or when we discover that it has already happened, because attacks can be in the network, or attackers can be in the network for potentially up to 146 days before they're even recognized.
It is a fascinating space. Industry experts talk about 5 problems in cybersecurity: industry, education, technology, recruitment, and talent. Are these the right 5 areas for companies to be focusing on?
So yes and no. So the way that I see it is that these are kind of lower down. What we have to focus on is really raising the awareness, improving our communication, and really actually focusing on the leaders and leaders within the whole ecosystem. So that means definitely the chief information security officers, and making sure that they can communicate to the board much more effectively and are getting access to the board, because many aren't. We also need to help the board because they are not necessarily as cyber literate as they could be. So they need to be able to communicate to the CISOs. And we also need to look at the non-executive directors who also play a part, because they can keep the board accountable. So it's increasing their cyber literacy as well. And then also, in addition to that, is really looking at the city, so the fund managers and the analysts. So there's an awful lot to do with looking at the stakeholders and understanding what it's like in their world, seeing the world through their lens, and fundamentally making sure that we can communicate effectively so that they understand really what our job is to do so we can be supported much more.
Let's take a look at the book Insecurity, because it was published last year. The premise, absolutely fascinating, because you argue that the cybersecurity industry is being damaged by the lack of women. Why is gender so important?
Because women see risk in a different way to men, and I'm not discrediting men at all by that, but we just do. There have been countless reports on how women see the risk, differently. So therefore, because we have an industry that is predominantly male. So whether it's 90%, whether it's 80%, doesn't make any difference. We still have an industry that is run by men, and also most of the leadership roles are with men. So if we can't see risk accurately, how can we actually look to defend and protect our environments? And we need the women to come in and to also open up more diversity in general. So more diversity of thinking, of background, socioeconomic, ethnicity, and so on. But we have to do a better job of actually evaluating what the risk is. And the only way that we can do that is through women. Now, women also, interestingly, with regards to this, intelligence increases in a group when you have more women in the group. So there are so many reasons for women to come into our industry, and so many reasons for us to benefit from having more women in the industry.
Absolutely. What can industry do to attract more women into their cybersecurity teams, to strengthen those teams?
So we do have to look at how we are attracting them. But for me, the thing that, and we also have to look at how we're hiring them, but the thing that I'm most concerned about is actually the retention, because more women leave the industry than come into it. And when you look at why they're leaving, it comes down to culture. And the culture is extremely challenging. So I talk about high challenge and low support. And if we have this environment and culture that is asking so much of us, without the support, without that awareness amongst all the stakeholders that I've just spoken about, then they're not going to stay. But I always say what is good for women is good for men too. So therefore, what I see with regards to the challenges to do with women, they're the same for leaders. So we have high burnout and high stress. And certainly with Chief Information Security Officers, many are staying in those positions for less than 2 years, which is not long enough to make the changes that we need to make in order to secure people, environments, countries, and so forth.
We are so glad you're here. These conversations need to happen, and we need to have more of them. Thank you so much for joining us on Sibos TV.
Thank you.
Cheers.